Welcome to LabMIS.com in our lab video series on Cisco ACI. This is Metha, your instructor for this video series. For a complete list of our ACI videos, you can visit our website under the Data Center section. There you can also sign up for our newsletters to receive the latest video updates. In this video, we are going to be looking into how to install and replace an ACI default self-signed certificate, so you don't need to keep running into the certificate warning. The lab setup that we use here consists of 2 spine switches, spine 1 and 2, and 4 leaf switches, leaf 1, 2, 3, and 4. And they're all connected and has been fully provisioned. Then we have a cluster of 3 APIC 1, 2, and 3, and we have been using APIC number 1 as our configuration point. All the components are connected to an out-of-band management VLAN, VLAN 99, the subnet 172.16.99.0/24, and the VLAN is located off out-of-band management switch, switch 1. The IP of our APIC 1 is .11 on that subnet. Off of the same switch, switch 1, there is a server VLAN, VLAN 32, with the subnet 172.16.32.0/24, and on that subnet we have our Windows 2012 domain controller at the IP of .40, and that's the same server that we have been using for DNS, and in this particular video or lab, we will be using it as a certificate authority server to sign our ACI certificate. So by default, ACI has a self-signed cert. So let me show you what that looks like. And here's the web interface to the APIC. We are running Chrome as our browser, so we need to hit F12, and then under security, you can view certificate. Or you can see right there has been issued to an APIC from or by an APIC, which is obviously a self-signed cert, and that is not trusted by the system. The same cert is also shared by all the fabric switches, so we can go to one of the leaf switch, maybe 101. And right there, we're not going to lock in, but if we do the same thing, view the certificate, you can see it's the exact same cert as the one that's on the APIC. So even if you don't care about certificates on the switches, the same cert is still used by the 3 APICs, each with different host name. Right, because we have LM APIC 1, 2, and 3. And just to show you that too, we can go into APIC number 2.12. And you can look at the cert. Same deal. Same certificate across all of the fabric switches and the APIC clusters. So on the APIC, there isn't a way for you to install a unique certificate for each fabric devices. And I said devices because this covers the entire fabric, including switches and APIC. As a certificate is actually applied at a pod level. Right? And these devices are all in the same pod right now, pod number 1. So pretty much the only 2 ways that all these devices will have a valid certificate is to use either a wildcard certificate, right? So one certificate is required as long as the switches is under the same domain name that's covered by the wildcard, then you can use that cert, or you can put all the devices' name as a multiple subject alternative name or SAN. So a single regular certificate, you can keep adding SAN entries into them, right? With each of the device host name being each of the entry. Since we don't want to keep adding new SAN to a certificate when new devices gets added to the fabric, what we're going to do is to use the wildcard certificate. So the first thing you're going to do is to obtain root and intermediate CA certificate. Hopefully you already know which certificate authority you're going to be obtaining your signed certificate from, whether it's the internal CA as part of your enterprise PKI or a public CA. Although this is a little weird that you need to obtain all CA certs right now, because if you deal with a public CA like VeriSign or DigiCert, they usually send their root and intermediate cert along with the signed certificate, which is after the fact that you already have the certificate signed. But you need this because the ACI needs the CA cert to reference as part of the CSR generation. In this case, you might need to contact your cert provider to get the certs in advance. And if it's an internal PKI, then you reach out to your CA admin and get those certs. For us, we're using a Windows 2012. certificate authority right there, so we can just web into it and download that. So we go to, actually it's the host we're on right now, so we can just do localhost cert srv. Actually, I misspelled localhost. There you go. Then download the CA certificate. Make sure I select the current one with base64. Since we don't really have intermediate CA, all we need is just this one root CA certificate. All right, so download CA certificate. And then let me put that on the desktop. Okay, just call it root. Okay, now if you go to the desktop, we should be seeing LM root CA self-sign, which is our root certificate of the CA. Then what we need to do is to import the certificate to ACI. So we can open that on Notepad. There you go, so I can copy it. Go back, and this is going to be under admin, AAA, and there's a section for public key management, and right there is a certificate authority. Let's go ahead and create a certificate authority. We'll call it lm-root-ca, and you can paste the certificate chain. Just FYI, if you happen to also deal with intermediate or issuing CA, then you need to concatenate them with the order of the lower level CA being on the top. So you go from issuing, intermediate, or subordinate, and then at the bottom will be your root CA. Since we only have the root CA, that's the only thing that we need in there. All right, submit. Next, we need to create a key ring. Just like the routers and switches, or even the ASA, I guess, you need to create a public key or RSA key for your certificate, assuming you'd use the RSA-based certificate anyway. So here, there's a default key ring that you can use, which is the one used to create the self-signed certificate, or you can also create your new one. Okay, we are going to do that. So right-click and create a key ring. So we'll call it key lm cert. Specifically going to be using it for certificate. And it appears the ACI only support RSA base right now, not elliptic curve. And we're going to pick the modulus 2048. And this is where you need to refer to the certificate authority. Maybe in the description I'll put cert for all fabric devices. All right, so without that CA, you won't be able to proceed. That's why you need to import the root and intermediate certificate in advance. Submit. Now with the key ring, you can right-click and create certificate requests. I mentioned that we're going to be using a wildcard certificate. I've actually tested several certificate formats, and what seems to work well is a wildcard in the SAN. If you're familiar with how Cisco ISE does its wildcard certificate, this is exactly the same. All right, so the format's going to be, in the subject can be any name you want. Here we're just going to call it aci.labminutes.com, and then in the subject alternative name, we're going to make sure that the exact same name is in there as a DNS. So you can see the example of the format that you need, DNS, colon, followed by the name. And then it's going to have a wildcard field in that as well. So DNS star.labminutes.com. And if your organization happens to have one of those security policies that prevents you from using the wildcard certificate, you might consider putting the ACI in its own little subdomain, so that way it's going to be a wildcard only for that little subdomain. So your subdomain could be something like aci.domain.com, or if you can't even do that, then you have to revert back to the other option, which is just adding hostname into the SAN, right, for all of your Fabric devices. Here we're just going to proceed with a regular wildcard certificate. State will be California, US. Organization is lab minutes. And milieu is IT. We're not going to bother email or password. And make sure the format looks correct. And then click Submit. And under there, you'll see a link to download certificate signing request, or CSR, in a base64 format. So all you need to do is to submit that to your corresponding CA to have that signed. All right, so I'm going to copy that, go back to this, Microsoft CA, request a cert. Will be advanced certificate request, paste it in there, and we're just going to use a web server. Submit, download certificate, we rename that to ACI on the desktop, and let's open that and take a quick look. So you see that it's issued to aci.labminutes.com, issued by LM root CA. You can see a valid certification path. SHA-256. Subject, just like how we specify under the CSR. SAN, we got aci.labminutes.com, and the wildcard field, which is star.labminutes.com. So now we need to import this certificate back into ACI. Bring up Notepad, drag it over, copy the content, go back. Now, if you go back to the keyring, there is a box where you can copy and paste your certificate into. So paste into that. You can see the admin state right now is started. Let's go ahead and click Submit and see what happens. And it immediately turns to completed. If the cert import fails, you might want to check the format of the cert and also make sure that the time synchronization of the APIX is there. Yet one of the times I kept failing importing the cert, and it turns out that my NTP was not synchronized and the time on the APIX was completely off. So that's why you can't really import the certificate until you get all the time synchronization that we did in the last video as part of the Fabric policies completed. And that's why we're doing this in this particular order. All right, now to apply the certificate to all of our devices, we need to go back. If you watch our last video, you might remember where that was. And that was part of the Fabric policies. And like I mentioned, it's being applied at the pod level. And the reason being, where you apply that, it's under management access, right, under the pod policies. And that's the management access policy that we currently use for all of our Fabric devices. And right here, as part of the keyring, right, instead of having that point to the default self-sign, you point that to the new keyring that we just created, LM cert or key LM cert. Select that, and oh, that didn't take effect. Let's see why. There you go. Click Submit. That's going to affect the pod policy group, which is fine. Click Submit Changes. All right, let's see if we get kicked out or not. Yep, there you go. Because we switched to cert. Just to be safe, let me close the browser. Open that back up, and this time, instead of using the IP, I'm going to access it by the name, which is lm-apic1.labminutes.com. There you go. Looks green, which means it's being trusted. And if we check out the certificate right now, you see that that's the cert that we just imported, right? ACI.labminutes.com. Even though the URL is lm-apic1.labminutes.com, since it's a wildcard cert, it is completely valid. And you can log back in, make sure to have access. Let me try to go to the leaf one or spine one switch maybe. So it'll be LM It's fine. When I have all these DNS records created already on the DNS server, that's why it's able to resolve the name. Yep, same deal. No more certificate warning. Nice and secure. View certificate, exact same certificate is being deployed to all of the Fabric components. So it doesn't matter if you go to maybe even APIC 2. No problem. No more certificate warning at this point. All right, so there's a couple more things I want to mention regarding the certificate on ACI as of today. The requirement is to have the CSR generated on APIC, as APIC does not support a private key import or even export. This also means that there is no way to back up the key, and if you lose the deployment, for whatever reason, you would need to generate a brand new certificate request and have that signed. And as I've already mentioned, if you're not too fond of using wildcard certificate just because of the risk of the exposure, you can do things like creating a subdomain, like aci.domains.com, to reduce the risk. Either that or put all the device's name into the SAN. Those are pretty much the options that I can come up with. If you are able to come up with a better option or cert format, feel free to share them in the comment section below. And that wraps up our video on ACI Certificate Install. You can visit our website to view an extensive list of our lab videos and sign up to get access to additional lab contents. Thank you for watching labminutes.com, and I'll see you guys in the next video.